This is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you for HIT 330. This is a Chapter 16 quiz debrief. Wanted to talk about the ones that we struggled with on this quiz. The first one I noticed that we seem to struggle on is number 4, which is an example of abuse. It is unintentional. Remember, abuse is unintentional. If it's a single coding error, it's not considered abuse. If it's a one-off, it's not abuse. If you deliberately did something, that's fraud. Again, if you deliberately do something, consistent misrepresentation, that is fraud. If you intentionally falsify or deliberately bill, consistently misrepresent, these are all examples of fraud. And this is an example of just a single error. And a single error does not constitute either fraud or abuse. But unintentional, that's when you get into abuse. So that's why that one is there. And if you're looking for those definitions, it's going to be on page 500 where it talks about fraud and abuse. So that's how the answers ended up on that one. Next one I want to talk about is number 8. And this is where HHS has identified a healthcare organization guilty of fraud. HHS saw the healthcare organization did not try to comply. They did not try to comply whatsoever. So which of the following reasonably applies to this scenario? Well, if they did not even try to comply, they can't argue reasonable cause or reasonable diligence. It has to be willful neglect. And this was on page. I remember seeing this not too terribly long ago, so let me go back to that. Oh, okay, top of page 506. It's willful neglect because they intentionally failed to comply with or were being indifferent to provisions. So that's willful neglect. So that definition you would have found at the top of page 506. Reasonable cause is that it would be unreasonable to expect the healthcare provider to comply with the requirements. Reasonable diligence means that the healthcare provider has tried to take reasonable actions to comply with the requirements. Willful neglect is they've done nothing, whether that's intentional or indifference, apathy, what have you, they just haven't done it. So that's where you would have found that information for number 8. Next one I noticed we struggled a bit with was number 11. And this talked about how the law gave the Inspector General, or OIG, the authority to exclude individuals and organizations that are convicted of healthcare-related crimes from receiving payments from any federal healthcare program. Medicare and Medicaid are federal. Medicaid is shared between the feds and the state. So Medicare programs only, yes, that is the feds. Medicaid programs only, that's fed and state. Medicare and Medicaid is the correct answer because both of those are federal, even though Medicaid has a state component to it. Private insurance has nothing to do with federal and state. That's completely independent, so that's why that one would be wrong. Even though 5 people didn't get it wrong, I wanted to address it because this is important that you know. Medicare and Medicaid are part of the OIG, and the federal government oversees them, even though Medicaid is run by the states. It's half funded by the feds, half funded by the state, and then there are fed programs that cover Medicaid, like the OIG for fraud and abuse. So that was the answer on that one. And where would you have found that? That Balanced Budget Act was back here on page 505. And it specifically says including Medicare and Medicaid programs. So that's where you would have gotten that answer. All right, next one I wanted to cover is number 18, down here. Unbundling is the practice of assigning diagnostic or procedure codes that results in higher payment rates than the codes that actually reflect the services provided to the patients. That is false. Why is it false? Unbundling might result in higher payment, but if you go back to the definition of unbundling, and this was on page 500, unbundling is the practice of using multiple procedure codes to bill for the various individual steps in a single procedure rather than using a single code that includes all of the steps of the comprehensive procedure code. So you had to know the definition of unbundling. The second thing is what this definition is, practice of assigning diagnostic or procedural codes that result in higher payment, that's called upcoding. And that was the next definition. So unbundling is not this definition. Upcoding is. Upcoding would have made this statement true. Unbundling is different. And those were both on page 500. So just wanted to let you know that. All right, that is it for chapter 16. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll probably be back to talk to you about chapters 12 and 18 once the dust settles on those and those are complete. Take care.